Hi guys, hold on for a second. Before we proceed to the video, I have something very important to tell you. Professor Jon V Kofas has published his new book in collaboration with Little French Media, and the title of the book is Neoliberalism, Inequality, and Authoritarianism. This book details how neoliberalism impacts the geopolitical economy in the 21st century. You can buy it from Amazon, and the link is in the description. Thank you. Now let's proceed to the video.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to a brief overview, a synoptic perspective on a video which I just did on US-China relations and the new Cold War that has brought about on a world scale, basically between US-led NATO and US-led G7 against the China-led BRICS group, and the specifically as far as the U.S. and the West is concerned, uh, the so-called axis of evil of four, especially four countries, which are China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran. This is a topic about which there has been enormous press coverage from every perspective possible. It continues on a daily basis. You can hardly read a major news organizations, whether it's print or online, whatever it is, um, magazine, newspaper, um, major social media outlets. They all deal with the tense relations between the US and China. There are always more developments almost on a weekly basis. US military exercises in the South China Sea, US efforts last week to use, that is the second week of October, to use the ASEAN group meeting taking place in Laos as a forum to launch a new offensive against China in the name of national security and defense, and the so-called new open door policy that the U.S. Wants to, in the name of the new door open policy that the U.S. is pursuing. The open door policy, by the way, was a late 19th century concept that the Secretary of State John Hay under President William McKinley introduced, basically arguing that China should be open to all countries, for Western countries, as well as Japan and Russia, for investment. Basically, back then, regrettably, for China, the opium trade, by the way, they were pushing dope on China, which clearly debilitated the productivity capacity of the Chinese peasants, the Chinese working class, usually paid in opium. These days, it's not opium, it's China that has asserted itself as the world's preeminent economy based on the IMF and World Bank, as well as other organizations' assessment, not on nominal value in terms of annual GDP, but rather the purchasing power parity of China is roughly 7 trillion above that of the United States. So, measured in purchasing power parity terms, which is what really matters because the currency itself is just paper, China has the world's largest economy and the world's largest manufacturing capacity, the world's um, trade, largest percentage of global trade. And when you combine BRICS, the China-led BRICS group, you're looking at a powerhouse. And as that group, as people know already, as that group is expanding and moving increasingly toward dropping the dollar and asserting monetary independence in terms of a hard currency for trade within the group, what we have is a situation where uh, the US and the West, as well as Japan, by the way, and Australia, are concerned that down the road we're looking at a very powerful China. The, the issue at the center of all this is not that China represents a military threat, considering that China spends one fourth of what the US spends on defense. First of all, that's a fact. Um, Second, the so called axis of evil, China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea, those four countries spend 5 times less than the US NATO group combined, 5 times less. And the third consideration is that it is not China's Navy and Air Force roaming around the Caribbean, the off the coast of New York, the New England coast, or out in California. It's not them doing this. The U.S. isn't in South China Sea. The U.S. is the one um, agitating in Taiwan, although there was an agreement. This is all a matter of record that there would be recognition of the one China policy. And although Taiwan is clearly, as one leader of China after another, successive leaders for for a long time throughout its history, have stated that Taiwan is a red line for them, and they will not accept any sort of outside agitation to use Taiwan in order to cause problems for China. Um, the goal of China is indeed economic hegemony. There's no doubt about that. This is, as I point out in the video, this is not an issue of angels and devils. This is an issue of concrete interests, but we have to look at the issues realistically and on the basis of um, what has actually happened. And what has actually happened in the last 30, 35 years or so is that China has had an astronomical rise in its economic growth, rapid industrial development, um, rapid integration, especially in the last 10 years, through the Belt and Road Initiative program, intended to integrate economically as much of the world as possible. Um, China, of course, holding some of the paper, in other words, the treasury bonds of the United States, to it's in its interest, by the way, to uphold the dollar, although they are transitioning gradually. China and the BRICS groups the BRICS group is transitioning out of that gradually, because it's not in its interest, by the way, to do anything sudden. It is in China's interest, as President Xi Jinping has pointed out, to maintain harmony and constructive commercial relations with the United States, not to have military confrontation. China has opted for diplomatic solutions in zones of conflict, the two proxy wars, and they're both, by the way, make no mistake about it, proxy wars in different um, modalities, with different operating under different modalities, both the Ukrainian and the Israeli war. The fact is, the United States is up to its neck. In even this morning, there were headlines about that, with not just more U.S. Military aid going to Israel, but actually U.S. military troops going to operate the new systems, defense systems that the U.S. is giving Israel. Both of those are intended to destabilize those regions, the respective regions, weaken the countries the U.S. considers rival, respectively Iran and Russia, and in the longer term goal, China. Why all of this? Very simply, as I point out in the video, in the longer video, because China is at the core of the world economy. The century, the American century, the 20th century is over. The era of Pax Americana is over. The US used to stand on three legs: political superpower, military superpower, economic superpower during the much of the 20th century, especially after the Bretton Woods system of 1944, which introduced the IMF and the World Bank. Now the US is in a comparable position as the old Soviet Union in the 1980s. It's standing on a single leg, namely military. The economic preeminence is gone. It belongs to China and its BRICS led group. This does not mean, by the way, I completely reject the rhetoric that somehow this means the end of the US as a great power. On the contrary, the US will play a secondary role. But in that role that it plays, as the world has seen, it has, because it's a military superpower with nuclear warheads, it has enormous leverage, geopolitical leverage, to undermine the world economy, not just Chinese economy. In trying to undermine the Chinese economy, by the way, as it is, it's undermining its own, but also the world economy. The world is paying a price for all of this. Um, as we have seen in the last year, uh, actually a couple of years, but especially in the last year, because of these twin wars, Ukraine and Israel, and because the US is behind both, it's a matter of record. They're not running away from that record. Um, Other countries, many countries, especially regional players, have raised their defense spending, have lowered the level of civilian spending. So the civilian economy, the spending for economic development in the civilian economy. So the civilian economy is suffering. China is all about economic development and social development. Um, this doesn't mean that it has neglected its defense, but it's playing defense on defense because China will not accept, by the way, the sort of power play of influencing other countries, especially in East Asia, as this ASEAN meeting last week showed in Laos, to destabilize China. They will not allow other countries, and they have the power to get over that, of course, unlike smaller countries that do not. They will not allow other countries to undermine them and this by through destabilization. I invite you to take a look at this video. It's about an hour and a half, an hour and 20-minute video. It goes in through a lot of issues from the um, first opium war back in the 1830s down to the present, to Xi Jinping's regime in this era of the new Cold War and where we're headed with all of this. I thank you. I ask all of you to watch both of this video, of course, to watch the other video, and to subscribe to Assad Alim's channel, which is educational, intended to bring you useful information about world events as well as other topics. Thank you very much.